a bunch of people who are downright bad people. But Plato comes to a certain insight where he finally will have to admit people who don't understand will act in the ways of their misunderstandings. It isn't that they're bad, it's that they don't know. Postulate the worst of human intentions in injustice, and take an individual who's committing that kind of injustice to the moment of his death or her death, to the last 5 seconds right before flatlining. And Socrates speculates that if you can take anyone to that moment, when they have the ability to actually see their own life in full kind of concert, that their response to that might be something like quasi-shock. Whoa. That is to say, they just don't know. This insight then says forgiveness is accepting ignorance in some way, recognizing that we all come to our own truth in our own way. And therefore, one of the key implications of the cave allegory is patience. One must have patience with those who are still in the cave and are chained up, and even if you try to emancipate them, they don't want to be free. They don't want to walk through the door. They want to keep running into the wall over and over and over. Now, of course, you have to respect a person's right to fail. That is to say, respect a person's right to run into the wall over and over again, right? So what is the final goal? Well, let's end by pointing out a couple of things. A term that gets used a lot after, of course, the cave allegory is what we'll call lifelong learning. The idea is that your education has so little to do with your schooling. It has to do with your whole life. And namely, of course, this process of using fear and pain to learn how to come to the appropriating of asking this question, why did this happen for me? That is a process that will take a long time, namely, the rest of your life. So much so that in Plato's Phaedo, which is the final words of Socrates, he is still interested in having a dialogue that leads to a certain kind of new insight. Here is an old man who's lived a long time and is ready to drink hemlock and die, and he wants to talk some more. And his students are like crying, and he's like laughing. And they want to know why he's laughing. And he says, well, why are you crying? Well, because you're going to die. And his insight is, have you not been hearing a thing I've been saying all these years? Of course I'm going to die. I'm an old man. Everyone dies. But what is death? And all of a sudden we go into this whole discussion about the soul and all these kinds of things in a final moment. In other words, he's trying to kind of all live out this lifelong learning project. 2 projects for lifelong learning. And I suppose Plato would argue they have to happen in this order. First, ourself. Are you familiar with people who are always wanting to fix everybody else, but they have all of these problems that are their own? Kind of an interesting insight, right? Plato will suggest, first start with self, then you can worry about everybody else. Of course, we could say that little mantra about leave the world a better place than you found it. Plato would probably like that mantra to sound something more like this: leave the world a little more free than you found it. First by freeing yourself, and then you can help freeing others and their emancipation project. That is to say, back to the original word picture, find the door and go out the door. So you can then help others find the door and go out the door. But never forget that in the history of the world, Plato would argue, there's been far more people who wanted to keep running into the wall over and over and over, believing that if they could just back up a little bit more, they somehow are going to find some moral victory or some meaning in the running into the wall over and over again. So Plato finishes the cave allegory by saying, once you are out of the cave, it is not over. Your enlightenment does not lead to self-celebration, but rather a certain kind of Kantian moral duty to return back into the cave and live a certain kind of life that will be misunderstood by the majority of people because they do not understand the insights that you now have. So patience is a requirement. And in the process of living that emancipated life of perspicacity, of asking the correct questions, why did this happen for me, you will not get a lot of applause from the people chained in the cave. As a matter of fact, you may be perceived as dangerous. Why? Because of misunderstanding. You know something they don't know. But the challenge, of course, will be to continue to live your life with that knowledge once you go back into the cave. Now, if this sounds like certain kinds of theological instructions you've had or you've experienced in your past, there's a reason for that. A man named St. Augustine was first a Platonist, then a Christian. And in his writings then, like the Confessions and City of God, he will take so many of these insights and he will translate them into a certain kind of theological approach that many of us will know as a Christian, and in many ways, all of the monotheism's approach, that is to say, Judaism and Islam, share these insights of a certain kind of moral life that, of course, we will call here a Platonic life. All right? Well, thank you, and enjoy your running into the wall.